customer acquisition costs are rising. Marketing budgets are flat. Does that have to mean fewer customers? Not if the Chief Experience Officer and AI have anything to say about it. Hi, I'm Courtney Baker, and this is AI Know-How from Knownwell, helping you reimagine your business in the AI era. As always, I'm joined by Knownwell CEO David DeWolf, Chief Product Officer Mohan and Chief Strategy Officer Pete Buer. We also have a discussion with Daniel Salvato about using AI to drive customer growth. But first, fill up those canteens and put on your sunscreen because it's time for another AI in the Wild. The biggest news in AI this week wasn't specifically about artificial intelligence. It was about Apple intelligence. Pete, what can you tell us about this week's big news coming from Cupertino?
Well, I know our segment's called AI in the Wild, but it looks like Apple intelligence picking season will be in the fall. But ahead of that, here's what we can expect. The main thrust is a revamp of Siri, transforming the voice assistant into a personal agent, able to handle more complex requests, use your personal context in shaping responses to your questions, and even offering proactive suggestions, the question you didn't think to ask. Secondarily, it's going to be working in the background of Apple devices, trying to help optimize the user experience, optimizing performance, extending battery life, and personalizing services across the Apple device line. Also, cranking up the quality and presence of Apple's augmented reality. Pretty cool stuff, but stock price and reporting on Monday was kind of a bit of a meh. Flat across the day and commentary almost having a disappointing feel to it. There were no real surprises in the announcement. Apple had leaked a fair amount of what was coming. And the functionality, as I just described it, has a little bit of a conservative feel to it, doesn't it? Kind of the basics, if you've been keeping up with what's going on in generative AI elsewhere in the world. And I don't know, maybe that's not enough to sell phones, but personally, I love the conservatism for this moment in time. Way too many people count on their Apple devices to run their lives, sometimes with their livelihoods at stake. And the acumen level of users stretches all across a spectrum. AI is absolutely new to some and old hat for others. I'm thinking there's nothing but downside to releasing some kind of a half-baked functionality for the point of splash here, and Courtney will remember the H&R Block and QuickBooks assistants who were back in the day advising on tax treatment and putting people in jail. And so, other cool thought on this one, Apple is kind of doing the work for every other corporation out there in the world right now, helping with the change management effort to get employees of all types comfortable using AI, familiar with the technology, so that when in the corporate setting, generative AI gets deployed, it gets deployed more successfully. And so that's, I think, another, there's just so much hanging in the balance. Since Monday, Apple's been trading up. It's over 10% last time I looked. So maybe a couple of these second, third order considerations are kicking in. But a closing thought on this one, Courtney, and I saved the best for last. Siri will now also work across all of the other apps on the phone, integrating information and pulling from them as needed from whatever the user request might be. Beyond being incredibly useful, I think that answers a question that we've been kicking around here for a long time about whether consumers need a second handheld device to crawl through the first one. I think we knew it was coming, but how ironic that this news would hit on the exact day my Rabbit R1 hit the mailbox.
That's
little
amazing.
Little bunny foo-foo, we hardly knew you.
Yes. Well, here's my thought on both of these. Finally on the Apple side and finally on the Rabbit side. I feel like both of these things are things that I feel like should have happened several months ago. So, but I am excited to use them personally, especially the upgrade to Siri on my own device. Pete, thank you as always.
Thank you.
What role will AI play in driving client growth and customer acquisition in the years to come? And is the Chief Experience Officer the Chief Marketing Officer of the past decade? I sat down recently with David DeWolf and Mohan Rao to talk about those topics and more. David, Mohan, I don't know if you ever have these moments, especially in your functional area. If you ever think back to, a previous time, previous decade and think, man, that was the sweet spot. That was the good old days. We didn't even realize it. For the CMOs out there, you might be speaking your love language right now, but in the 2010s, it was the time for the CMO. Acquiring customers was really affordable. We were in the age of digital marketing. Mm-hmm. It was working so well. Mm-hmm. Now, unfortunately, we've kind of come to the other side of that. Acquiring customers is, more expensive than ever, yet marketing budgets are the same. So much of what worked back then no longer works. And I have a premise that we are on that same path with client growth. So if that was true for the CMO, just a few years ago, the glory days. I sound really old now.
You're saying that very nostalgically, like you really miss it.
Yes. I suspect that we may be in that same season for client growth. And I'm curious to get your 2 points or your 2 perspectives on how AI is playing into client growth.
That's fascinating because if you think about it, why did digital marketing take off? What was it that really put the CMO back on the map? And I would say, and I've written before about how the CMO during the digital revolution really came into their own and became a full-fledged member of the C-suite again. I think it's because the media of the time was measurable in a way that previous forms of media were not measurable, right? And we had the ability to measure click-through rates and the cost of acquisition and those types of things in a very new way that allowed marketers to run a very disciplined operating machine to drive results. Mm-hmm. Well, I think that was well and good, and I think all functions of business should go through that when they can. But it has been really hard for aspects of the business that aren't measurable inherently and that can't do math to figure out their metrics. And I think that what you're talking to is this reality in customer success, right? Customer success, client management, account management, these types of things, especially in B2B professional service organizations, have inherently been relational, not transactional. And when they are relational and not transactional, you can't measure it. I think what AI does is give us the ability to actually transform this communication, this natural exhaust of the business, of the relationships that we call communication, and transform it into true operating metrics, into what we can use to drive performance execution. And I think when that happens, we are going to see a revival of the effectiveness and the efficiency with which we serve and manage our commercial relationships.
I think I get to the same answer in a slightly different way. Courtney, first of all, it's a brilliant question. So as I was thinking of David's answer, which makes a lot of sense, I think the question is, can customer success be a growth driver, right, in this new era? Mm-hmm. And the answer is clearly yes. And the reason why it is possible now through AI is because of 2 fundamental things. David just touched on one, which is historically it was a reactive function. Now there is truly a chance to be proactive and be able to anticipate clients' needs and be proactive in how you engage with the client. Mm-hmm. That is a fundamental difference from where we were to what's possible today. Mm-hmm. The second is we're able to personalize client experiences at scale. That was not possible before. It used to be all clients were the same, and we really strived for uniformity, right? Even if it was dumbing down the mean, we were uniform. That's what we used to aim for. And now it's possible to personalize at scale. That was not possible before. So I'd say those are the two reasons why customer success can truly be a growth driver in today's age.
I think, Mohan, maybe even more brilliant than Courtney's framing is your answer. I think those two points are right on, right? The ability to be proactive and the ability to personalize in new ways. I mean, that's ultimately when you think about exceptional client service, that's what it's about. Like, in fact, as we have been going through our research and looking at what are the true drivers of commercial health and creating these long-term growing commercial relationships, we have found that in the data, that over and over again, the drivers are things like being proactive, being incredibly responsive, right? Or two big drivers. The personalization, like having a relationship and the health of that relationship and how you're able to really personalize that experience really matters in services. So I think those are spot on. I also think about the other part of the equation. The one I was thinking about as you were starting off was we have found in the research that one of the big categories that drives commercial health is the delivery quality perception. And what's really fascinating here is that most firms measure delivery quality. And so you'd think, man, we should be nailing this. But what they don't measure is the perception, which again is that personalized aspect of it is how is that received by the buyer? How is that perceived by the client? Because it's the perception that matters. It's not whether you follow your quality control process or, this X, Y, or Z process or standard, right? What matters is it received that way? And that again speaks to that personalization. And so I think we have this new ability that's right on our fingertips that leaders, client service professionals should all be craving more of. And as we get there, what I get really excited about is actually thinking serving clients is not a customer success job. All right. That works in SaaS. It works in software business. It does not work in a professional service business. It's a full company job. And so what we can start to do is actually scale what's been impossible to scale, because the firms that do this well do it with a partner model where it's individuals that are delivering that. What we can start to do is institutionalize what we have not been able to institutionalize before to allow that proactivity and that personalization.
So David, Mohan, earlier in the fall, we made a statement about the CHRO and that maybe this moment was their moment to rise up in the organization and really have a new era for that role, a different looking kind of, if you think about it, what you said about a CMO. I know you said just a second ago, when it comes to services, it's really the whole organization. But I do think sometimes there are certain people in an organization that really start to make that change. What role do you see has the possibility to kind of have a new seat at the table, especially when it comes to the executive team?
I think you're just trying to point out the fact that while I might have gotten the prediction on Amazon right, that I got this one wrong on the CHRO. Is that what you're pointing out? No, here's the common thread.
Now that you pointed out, yes.
Here's the thing. Whether it is a CHRO who's charged with the employee experience, or it is the chief client or chief customer officer, which is charged with the client/customer experience, I think it's all about that experience. What did Mohan speak to? The personalization, the proactive I think those are the types of things that drive experience. And so maybe it's the chief experience officer. I do think, though, what's most important is actually it's not the role, it's not the title. It's actually that capability of creating more human connection, allowing us, being the tool that allows us to do what we as humans can do better than anybody else, and only we can do, which is build relationships with each other, right? And that experience of relationship and really supporting the process of business rediscovering humanity, I think is actually what it's all about.
Now, we've also discussed AI as the scaling sauce. So when you think about phrases like personalization at scale, it is a confusing term, right? How can you personalize and be at scale, right? So, but that's the segment of one that was not possible before because you grouped customers together and you try to give them uniform service. But now what you can do is you can truly treat these customers as a segment of one and do the right things by them and proactively at that. That's where I think the secret here is to make your existing clients a growth driver.
David, Mohan, thank you as always.
Thanks, Courtney. Thanks, David.
Brilliant.
I like it. We've talked a lot on this show about the client retention imperative for professional service companies. Now we have a playbook you can follow to start incorporating AI into your client retention efforts. Go to knownwell.com/playbook today. There you can download the latest brainchild from our Chief Strategy Officer, Pete Buer, and learn how to ensure your most valuable resource, your clients, remain just that. Pete Buer sat down with Daniel Salvato of NewSpring Capital recently to hear how their portfolio companies are using AI to drive growth and scale.
Daniel, welcome. It's so great to have you on the podcast.
Thank you, Pete. Great to meet you as well, and glad to be on.
Let's give our listeners a little context for the conversation if we can. Can you give us the high points on NewSpring and your role?
Sure. Give you a little background here. So NewSpring Capital is around a $3.5 billion asset manager. It's got nearly a 25-year track record of providing lower middle market, often founder-owned, family-owned businesses with flexible capital solutions ranging from mezz debt to growth equity to majority recaps. And within the NewSpring Capital umbrella, I'm a principal with NewSpring Holdings, which is our dedicated buy and build strategy in the tech-enabled services space. So what we do is build platform companies in thesis areas we believe are aligned with prevailing macro trends through a combination of targeted M&A and methodical organic growth. Once we acquire a platform in one of these areas, we surround the company with seasoned industry leaders who want to help the founder on this journey, and we begin quickly investing in organic growth initiatives and key infrastructure to support scalable operations. And then on the M&A side, our model typically entails supporting our platforms execute 5 to 10 deals, which are all highly strategic and become fully integrated into the final product.
Awesome. Thank you. And as you know, this is an episode that's about using AI to help drive customer growth. I heard growth several times in your setup. So let's start there. What's your take on how portfolio companies are looking at AI as a mechanism for spurring growth?
Yeah, look, it's a great question, and this is a frequent topic of discussion with all of our management teams. Most of the companies in our portfolio are really service providers, and what we've seen is a lot of encouraging signs from those who have leaned into the technology to fuel productivity gains in everything from customer acquisition to delivery execution to administrative support functions. And to give you a few just real-world examples out of our portfolio, we've got a business called Underdog & Company that's in the sports, entertainment, and culture marketing space. They've been using it to actually create content, both kind of marketing, outbound communications, things for their clients. It's really accelerating the way that they're able to create content and get that out into the world. Bridgecore, they're a government contracting company that primarily serves the intelligence community. They utilize AL and ML routinely as part of their core execution of data visualization and also analysis as a service. And another example would be Wealthcare. They're an RIA, and they've been using it to accelerate a lot of their outbound BD communications. And so apart from some of these kind of discrete portco use cases, I would say we at NewSpring Capital are also using the technology pretty heavily. So we believe that competency in harnessing AI will be a real differentiator among private equity firms. And so we've been developing use cases internally that include everything from research, information synthesis, data engineering, and content creation, and then trying to share these learnings and practices down to our portfolio companies and creating tools and applications that they can actually use and incorporate into their own execution.
Awesome. Tons of activity at the company level with leadership teams pushing on their own, and then support from you as an investment banker. What does that second process look like? Do you sort of make yourself available to them? Do you have them do strategy reviews and figure out how you can engage them? Do you have a task force that circulates among portfolio companies to try to help them figure out how to adopt AI?
Yeah, so I think what's a little bit unique about our model is our portfolio is really meant to just be a handful of companies that we're building kind of significant sized platforms out of. And so we stay deliberately concentrated like that so that we can be very enmeshed in what they're doing day to day. And I think that additional connectivity just allows us to have that kind of open dialogue and understand what are they sort of experiencing as a barrier to growth? And are there ways that we can help them find solutions, either internally or externally developed, that can help break down some of those barriers to do things more efficiently and be able to grow faster? And so in some cases that involves going kind of outside of us to get resources that can help them scale. And in other cases, it's things that we develop in-house and can allow them to leverage on their own journey.
Nice. So it's kind of like you're a member of the team and you've got intimacy, proximity, and you're just part of the conversation, which
I think that's a fair way to describe it.
Strikes me as the best way to go. How do you know when a company's really got lock on a great idea?
So I think it's important that every company is kind of having a pipeline of ideas that they're always working through. I think you never want the company to go kind of into a black box and try to emerge months later with a perfectly refined new idea to test. So I think you want that kind of sandbox where companies feel empowered to be constantly iterating and testing new ideas on a smaller scale to see if they're getting traction, if they've got that lock. And if you have that kind of creativity that's embedded in the operations, then every now and then something's going to stick and you're going to notice that it's working. Either it's getting great feedback from customers or you're seeing new clients won because of it. There's a lot of kind of early signals that can point to the success of an initiative like that. And I think that's when we find it's the right time to pour more fuel on the fire, give them the capital and the empowerment to expand on what's working.
Nice. So you've described your process for helping to enable growth, and you've shared some great examples of how companies are driving growth. How about the competitive landscape? How is AI going to change what your portfolio companies are up against?
Yeah. So look, I think in the old machine learning paradigm, what you used to see was that large companies would have huge data sets that they would use to train their own proprietary models to try to eke out an incremental advantage. And that would allow them to kind of fare much better than smaller companies who had less data and no resources in terms of data science to actually do what the larger companies were doing. And so it was very much a world of the haves versus the have-nots when it came to kind of modeling and data science. But what's happened now is that large-scale AI models and LLMs are really leveling the playing field. And that's because the hugely expensive endeavor of training these all-purpose models is really being absorbed by just a handful of large tech companies, and they're making it widely available. So GPT-4 is reported to have cost around $100 million to train and has over 1 trillion different inputs, but you can use it for $20 to $30 a month. And I think what that means is, setting aside maybe some incremental advantages that large companies have from fine-tuning models and building infrastructure on top of them, a mid-market company can use ChatGPT and OpenAI's models just as effectively as a large company to do research, generate content, and sort of break down some of those barriers and scale requirements that may have made it harder to execute on new ideas previously. And so what I think this is going to really drive is a new paradigm where the differentiator can come from who can be most nimble and creative in thinking of new ways to innovate in their markets. And that's where we think that mid-market companies have really always excelled.
So as a small company, you've got a once in a generation chance to play on a level field and go up against the big guys with a pretty darn good shot at succeeding.
Yeah, I think that's right. And, I think just as a, point of reference, things are increasingly moving further and further down market. My colleague Lee was actually on this podcast back in October.
Yep.
And he was talking about Copilot and how that was initially only going to be available to Microsoft's largest corporate customers at that time. Well, now that's available to everyone. We've got access to Copilot and we've been using it for our own internal operations. And I think what you find is that for a lot of these bandwidth constrained teams in the lower end of the market, these tools are a real kind of multiplier, and they allow these companies to do a lot more with their existing employees than they could have ever done previously. And I think that actually stands in contrast with some of what we've seen at the larger end of the market, where you've seen a lot of announcements of things like layoffs, where IBM said they're going to replace thousands of roles with kind of AI solutions, and they're making cuts in marketing and communications. And so I think while the smaller companies are doing more with the people they have, some of the larger companies are trying to do the same thing with less people. And that's where I think this technology really starts to favor these emerging middle market companies with new ideas that they want to scale.
You've got a relatively unique perspective here too, in that you were an operator, CEO, prior to your time as an investor.
Yeah.
You must feel empathy for the people in the top seat. What's the hardest for them right now?
Look, I think one of the challenges with machine learning, data science, and AI is always how to make it useful, because it, on the surface, sounds very interesting, sounds very novel. You're getting pressure from your investors, from your directors to make sure that you're at the forefront of utilizing this. And then it's going to be on your shoulders to ensure that that execution goes very well and actually delivers value to those shareholders and to your company. I think in the case of Above, look, the lending industry had been using data science and AI for a long time in the form of machine learning ensemble models, and using that to do everything from targeting customers, underwriting loans, monitoring the portfolio. And that was a long time before LLMs really brought AI more into the public consciousness. But two of the things that I think I learned in going through that experience that I think are kind of valuable for many executives who may be in that same position now is to first, don't underestimate the need for real perseverance in tackling some of the foundational issues here. So before your models are going to be producing interesting, useful outputs, you've got to do that blocking and tackling of the data engineering, the data hygiene, getting everything organized and structured so that you can get useful outputs from the models that you end up building. And that's always hard work, but the longer you wait to do it, it just gets harder because the more and more data gets incorporated there. And then the other kind of point of guidance that I would offer is these machine learning models, and that's whether we're talking about kind of old school random forests or new LLMs, they're very good at using a massive amount of data to answer a specific question. But the art really becomes, how do you figure out what are the right questions to ask? And then what judgments do you apply to those answers? So if I was an executive, I'd say now that the computational exercise of kind of mathematically answering these questions is becoming a lot easier with AI tools, what they should be focused on is how can their organization be pointing them in the right direction to ask those questions and do useful things with the answers that come out of it.
Daniel, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Great to meet you, and really appreciate all the thinking and insight.
Thank you, Pete. Really appreciate it.
Thanks as always for listening and watching. At this point in the show, I usually ask you for a rating or a review, but today I'm going to ask you for something different. Would you go into your podcast player right now and just hit the follow link? This is another great way to help more people discover the show. At the end of every show, we like to ask one of our AI friends for them to weigh in on the topic at hand. So hey, Perplexity, welcome back to the show again. This episode, we're talking about the role of the Chief Experience Officer in the age of AI. What do you think their role will be?
The Chief Experience Officer's role will evolve to oversee the seamless integration of AI into customer experiences, ensuring AI enhances rather than hinders interactions. They'll collaborate closely with data and tech teams to implement AI responsibly, ethically, and in a human-centric way.
And now you're in the know. Thanks as always for listening or watching. We'll see you next week with more headlines, roundtable discussions, and interviews with AI experts. Hey, if you made it this far in the episode, first of all, thank you. And second, we know that AI is changing all the time, and so we've got you covered. Here is another great episode for you to watch to stay in the loop on what's happening in AI and business. And second of all, we'd love for you to subscribe. You can do that right here. I've always wanted to do that, by the way. So do that now. That would be great.